Joining us now, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He's Chief International Analyst for NBC News. Also with us, staff writer at The Atlantic, Graham Wood. His latest article is titled, Hamas Doesn't Want a Ceasefire. Good morning to you both. Admiral, let me start with your analysis of that proposed new plan from Israel about what this war will look like. You've been telling us for some time at some point soon it would come down to more targeted raids and going after Hamas leadership and not the wide-scale bombing we've seen. What do you make of this new proposal?
I think it makes sense, and I like the idea of a division of mission between North and South. In the North, the center of gravity is the infrastructure. It's the tunnel complex. It's the ability that Hamas created to launch this kind of dramatic strike against Israel to shield their nefarious activities from overhead sensors. All of that, that's infrastructure. That will be up in the North. In the South, the center of gravity remains the leadership of Hamas. That's where they're still holed up, the ones that haven't fled to Qatar or the Persian Gulf or points north. And so there are two distinct missions there, Willie. And the good news for Israel is that neither one of them requires massive bombing campaigns, huge collateral damage. There'll be less of that going forward, and the Israelis will use more of their special forces, foot soldiers, precision-guided work, commandos, if you will, alongside engineers who are going to be thinking very long and hard about how to permanently decommission that tunnel complex in the North. So I think this is a good military tactical kind of strategy. What I am less sanguine about is the long-term plan and the idea that somehow, in a very vague sort of way, the local control will be given to clans or families or entities. That strikes me as a prescription for a lot of confusion and a lot of danger. I would want to see a cleaner plan, but there aren't willing participants on the other side, at least yet, to take the handover. So Israel is reaching for some kind of plan going forward. I think it's going to be very difficult. As usual in war, it's easy to get in. You can conduct the tactical fight. The hard part is the exit strategy. I don't see that yet.
Yeah, and as you look at the top line in that proposed war plan, it just says, as a matter of fact, Hamas will not control Gaza. Easier said than done, as you say, Admiral. So, Graham, you're writing about this week in The Atlantic, that Hamas will not accept a ceasefire. That's something we've sort of known from the beginning, as people have been calling for a ceasefire here in the United States and around the world in this war, that Hamas will not cease firing, despite what the world is asking for. So how do you see this playing out from here?
Yeah, I think Admiral Stavridis is correct that much of the plan that's been outlined is realistic. The long-term plan, still a lot of hand-waving that's involved in suggesting that there will be some kind of Palestinian presence that will administer the Gaza Strip. But what we're seeing, though, is that Hamas needs something other than a ceasefire. It's the opposite of a ceasefire for it to achieve its objectives. At some point, it was hoping that Israel would kind of let up on its bombing, on its attempt to invade the Gaza Strip. When that didn't happen, now the only hope that Hamas has is to widen the war, to make it regional. And so when we say, we'd like a ceasefire, it's a matter of saying it in Hebrew, also Arabic, and increasingly in Persian, too, because the conflict has been at Hamas's desire and at the guidance increasingly of Tehran, widened to include, as your report said, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and other entities in Iraq that are guided by Iran, and asking Iran to cease fires, asking it to abandon a mission that it's had for the better part of 30 years.
So, Admiral, from the early hours of this war, the Biden administration has been intent that it not widen into a regional-wide conflict. But what we have seen in this last week or so, we have seen these explosions in Iran, we have seen the killing in Iraq, we have seen violence in Lebanon, a strike in Beirut. We have, of course, seen the growing chaos in the Red Sea. So walk us through this. Is this the Gaza spilling over its borders? And how concerned are you that this could just be the beginning of something that gets even bigger?
I am very concerned about it, and Graham is exactly right. Graham, by the way, came up when I was dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts University. He did a marvelous presentation about one of his earlier books. Graham, good to see you. He is correct that this is a decision that is not going to be made in Washington, not going to be made in Jerusalem, not going to be made in the Gaza Strip, not going to be made in Beirut. It's going to be made in Tehran. You know, we think of the Iranians as this kind of annoying mid-level power. That's not how they see themselves. They see themselves as inheritors of the Persian Empire, which stretched from the Indus River in South Asia to the Mediterranean Sea. And their objectives are breathtaking, and they're going to continue to pursue them. The one that I'm particularly focused on and that worries me in terms of a widening conflict, in addition to all of the hotspots that you mentioned, Jonathan, and you know the Admiral's going to say this, is out at sea. And the reason is because 15% of the world's shipping, maybe a bit more, is really in irons, we would say, in the Navy, because they can't get through the Red Sea. You know, and it's a big place. It's the size of the state of California. It's that body of water kind of dead in the center of the graphic you're showing. And you can't patrol the state of California with half a dozen police cars called cruisers and destroyers. Sooner or later, we have got to deter Iran into pulling back on these Houthi pirates. And frankly, we ought to stop calling them Houthi pirates. They're Iranian pirates. They're trained, equipped, and organized by Tehran. And that is a dagger pointed at the heart of the global shipping chains. And if that is allowed to continue, the economic impact is going to be disastrous. So I know the White House is looking carefully, doesn't want to escalate, doesn't want to drag us into a regional war, but we have got to create more deterrence in the minds of the mullahs in Tehran.
I have a question for Graham, which is about the day after. The Biden administration has a very clear position that it ought to be the Palestinian Authority, which has authority in the West Bank, that ultimately comes in and somehow runs Gaza after the war. The Israelis have just given a flat no to that. So how do you think that gets resolved between these two key actors, the United States and Israel, as to what happens and who leads Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, the American argument for why it should be the Palestinian Authority is a two-word argument. Who else? It's the only Palestinian entity that has established itself with any competence at all. And I use that word advisedly because its competence can certainly be questioned. The Israeli position that the Palestinian Authority cannot be ruling Gaza is a byproduct of a broader view that this war can't be for nothing. And there is a large constituency in Israel that says as long as there is an armed entity in Gaza that doesn't support the right of Israel to exist, or that has a hostile view toward Israel, it will eventually use those arms, and there will be another 7th of October. So I think these are simply incommensurable views. There's no way that the Israelis, as they're currently constituted, as their government's currently constituted, will be okay with the Palestinian Authority moving in. And the United States has, along with many others who are observing the situation, has no better offering. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to be resolved. But eventually, there has to be something other than an Israeli occupation there, and I'm very curious to see what that's going to be.
The Atlantic's Graham Wood and retired 4-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis, thank you both very much for your insights this morning. And